this is surprising. This is surprising to me because usually the candidates themselves are not the ones to actually post the attack ads. They generally rely on PACs to do that on their behalf, so that they can keep their own messaging positive and upbeat. However, Trump is not your normal candidate, and he never has been. So anyway, let's take a look here at this. This is I'm going to be watching it for the first time, just with whoever else hasn't seen it.
Okay, we recently told you about a pro-DeSantis super PAC which released its first anti-Trump ad. We now have Donald Trump posting a hardcore Ron DeSantis attack ad to Truth Social.
Truth Central.
And what's interesting is that some of the claims that it makes, it's a very aggressive, very vicious attack ad. But the claims it makes aren't exactly bulletproof, which might not come as a shock to you. Let's take a listen.
Was struggling big time in his primary race for governor of Florida. Polls revealed DeSantis was failing so bad, he was losing by a staggering 17 points. Then, DeSantis was saved by the endorsement of President Trump. Trump's support was so powerful, just 2 days after the endorsement, DeSantis took a commanding lead, and it propelled him to being elected governor.
I'd like to thank our president for standing by me when it wasn't necessarily the smart thing to do.
You're welcome, Ron. Unfortunately, instead of being grateful, DeSantis is now attacking the very man who saved his career. Is that time DeSantis remembers how he got to where he is?
Make America great again. Big league. So good. Build the wall. Then Mr. Trump said, "You're fired." I love that part.
Truth is, there's only one person who can make America great again.
Yeah.
Wow. Okay, so I believe, y'all can correct me if I'm wrong here, that DeSantis won in his first victory was in 2018, right? And I don't remember if that was a special election or not, but I believe that we ran Gillum for governor of Florida, and it was not a commanding lead. It went to a recount and ballot curing. It was a very close race. So, no, it wasn't a commanding lead. And I don't know at what point he was endorsed and what his actual poll numbers are. But it was a close call for them to win that election. And probably the only reason we didn't win it is because, I'll be real, because there's racism going on in Florida and our candidate was black. And it ultimately turned out that our candidate was also bisexual. So he had a couple of things that any of these identity politics fuckers have a problem with, they're going to come after him with, you know? There was, I think the most disturbing thing is that people like Savage Joy, Convo Couch, you know, all this live streamer network, were coming after the Democratic candidate because they didn't feel like he was strong enough on the Palestine versus Israel issue. And they want all of the candidates to be 100% behind BDS, which is boycott, divest, sanction. It's a movement that's incredibly extreme, especially considering it would be against an allied nation. It would be very difficult for us to actually put down that kind of policy against an ally that we trade actual defense technology with. Anyway, let's see what David has to say.
So, you know, this entire thing about how 2 days after the endorsement, DeSantis just shot up. I encourage you to go back and look at the polls. Real Clear Politics has like a historical polling trend line on that race. And it is true that eventually DeSantis surged as the election got close, but it wasn't over the summer. when Trump claims that his endorsement in 48 hours turned the race around. It was months later. Now, you can debate whether it was thanks to Trump's endorsement months earlier. I'm not even trying to have that debate with you. The story that's being told, DeSantis was dead, and then I endorsed him, and 48 hours later, he was absolutely crushing in the polls. It's just not what the polling data shows when you look at it retrospectively. So I do think that, Trump's in a position where there's the real reason he's angry with DeSantis, and then there's what stuff can he use to criticize DeSantis. There's a little bit of a dissonance between the two. The real reason Trump's furious at DeSantis is that DeSantis not ruling out running is seen by Trump as totally disloyal. The problem is Trump's going after DeSantis for example, saying Trump says DeSantis's COVID numbers are terrible. They're mediocre. They're not terrible. They're not good. Florida is very mediocre in most metrics. So when Trump...
Well, and they would have been much better had he not followed Trump's advice to reopen the economy, to force kids back into school, to continue spreading the disease. Those were all... He was trying to be Trump's boy at that point. So that's kind of a ridiculous claim. Oh, yes, it's the worst. Well, it's the worst because he followed you, asshole.
Used to praise DeSantis on COVID. Now he attacks him on COVID. The truth is, it was both sort of like, it's not great in Florida, but they benefit from the warm weather and people being outdoors. And so the numbers aren't as bad as they could be. Right. He wants to cut and gut Social Security. He voted for a study group proposal that was non-binding, which would have raised the retirement age. Is that a sort of cut? Yes. Did he really vote for the cut? Well, everybody knew it wasn't going anywhere. It was just a study group proposal. Is that a really strong critique, particularly when Trump has also said, I would look at entitlements? Not really. And so Trump, if this really gets going, is going to have to find something a little more solid, I guess I would say, with which he can go after Ron DeSantis.
The thing is too, that the PAC ad was actually far more impactful, I think, than what we just watched here on David Pakman's show. Because even though it's not all that important that he's uncouth and has no table manners, the fact is that probably a lot of Americans don't and will be like, okay, that's gross, but it's not that big of a deal. Or they may actually have a positive effect here where they're like, oh, is that how I'm perceived when I do that? Right? Maybe I should stop doing that, especially in public, right? The Putting Fingers ad, I think, was far more successful as a hit campaign. DeSantis still hasn't even announced. He hasn't announced yet. We all expect that he will sometime in May, but I don't know. He might reevaluate at this point because running against Trump is not going to be like running against any other candidate. And if he has an open field for the 2028 cycle, he's not that old, right? He might try and be the Republican challenger at that point, which, by the way, he's just as bad as Trump. He just isn't as unhinged. He is a little bit unhinged, though. I mean, if you've seen some of his more recent travels across, like in Israel and in Japan, some of his behaviors on those trips are not great for him. He's very defensive. He's bobbling his head, right? He had the bobblehead thing. He got questioned about his time in the military when he was at Guantanamo Bay, and certain prisoners have had statements about seeing him there. And so there's a bunch of stuff out about him right now. So this might not be the best time for him to run. I don't honestly, I would hate it if he became our president as well. And so for those of you out there who keep tearing down Democrats and letting these motherfuckers in, shame on you. By the way, I'm thinking back to this, switching topics, because Marjorie Taylor Greene has been in the news quite a bit too, with her reactions to Tucker Carlson getting fired. I think back to when she was stalking David Hogue in DC and getting in his face, and how rude and aggressive she is. Any DC activist groups that are out there, I highly suggest that you organize a protest where you follow her to the Capitol while she's walking up and chant, shame, shame, shame. You know, if you start taking her own tactics and working it against her, maybe she'll be scared enough to actually shut the fuck up. I can't guarantee anything, but maybe.